Hello and welcome to the third and final bonus stitch along video from Stitch People for Michael's How to Cross Stitch and Learn Basic Embroidery Techniques class. If you haven't watched the class, you can do that on michaels.com/classes or Michael's YouTube channel, and be sure to check out our first two bonus stitch along videos where we dig into doing a little bit more of this Sherlock Holmes and John Watson pattern. So the first thing we're going to do in this video is finish stitching the Sherlock Holmes character on the far left of the pattern. We stitched his face, we did some straight or satin stitches for his hair, and we did his pipe. We're going to finish his suit today, and we're also going to work on his hat and the plaid pattern in the hat using the red color and the DMC 645. We're going to use the brown for his suit and go ahead and cut about a 4 arms length of that, and then split the 6 threads into 2 groups of 3. I like to use 3 threads on size 14 of fabric. That's just my preference. So I'm going to go ahead and split that apart so that I can stitch the suit jacket for Sherlock Holmes. So I'll thread my needle and get going on that. So this suit is just cross-stitched. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and finish up that suit. Just going down the right side and then over to the left. And then I'm going to swap out my floss and stitch the black vest, which includes 2 half stitches or diagonal stitches that share some space with the white DMC Blanc shirt color. And I'll zoom in while I'm working on that just to review how I like to do half stitches that share a square like we did over here on the John Watson pattern. We're going to do the same thing for the vest that Sherlock wears. I've already stitched the diagonals of the DMC 310 or black color in the vest. You can see I've just got 2 little diagonals, and now I'm going to stitch a diagonal with the white. But what I like to do as I pull that tight is hold aside the existing diagonal, in this case it's the black color, and use my fingernail to pull that aside so that the white or second color will lay really nicely against the existing color and share the square. And I'll do the same thing on the other side here. Make a diagonal going the same direction, pull that tight slowly, move the loop out of the way, and then use my fingernail to pull the existing half stitch aside so that this new half stitch or diagonal can lay really nicely, neatly side by side of the first stitch. And that is that. Looks really nice. So I will run my needle underneath some of the stitching on the back side to secure my floss and clip that off and move on to my next element. So I'm going to stitch Sherlock's hat using 3 strands of the taupey brown color that we've got for Sherlock's suit, and that's just cross-stitched. So I'm just going to follow the pattern, whip that up really quick, and get the base of his hat all set. And when I'm done, I'm going to flip that over, run my needle across some of the stitches on the back, and swap my color. So now I'm going to work on the plaid of Sherlock Holmes' hat with DMC 221 and 645, the red and gray. And I'm just going to use 1 strand of floss for these really fine details and make straight stitches like we did on the door of 221B Baker Street. Just long, straight stitches in the gray and red color. And I'm gonna play with maybe weaving those stitches around each other a little bit, weaving my needle in and out to create a plaid effect. But for now, I'm gonna cut a length of floss and split the threads apart and just grab 1 strand of DMC 645 to start with the gray plaid detailing of the hat. So once I've got that single strand or thread, I'll thread my needle, and I'm going to bring my needle up, and I'm just going to give the hat a quick outline to define it against the hairline and the skin tone a little bit. So I'm just going to use this 1 strand of DMC 645 and again, basically outline the hat to give it a little more definition. I'm having trouble bringing my needle up through a hole in the fabric. What I'm trying to do is that thing that I mentioned in class a lot, where you want to bring the needle up sort of next to any existing threads that sit inside a hole of the Aida fabric, as opposed to shoving your needle through the existing floss and contributing to it fraying or anything like that. So even if it takes an extra second to get that needle through smoothly, it's worth it so that your work looks nice and uniform and neat. So I'm just going to finish up stitching the outline of the hat there along the brim to define the brim and define the hat from the skin tone, just like it shows in the pattern. So now that I've finished that, I'm going to start making the long straight stitches horizontally of DMC 645. And if you look at the pattern, you can see that the gray lines in the plaid sort of sit halfway between the holes in the Aida fabric. So using the point of your needle, you're going to have to poke between the holes of the fabric to get the gray thread to lay where you want it to go. So I'm just going to poke right between the holes there and pull that tight. And that is a little bit crooked actually, and I just tried to retrace my steps and it didn't work out. So I'm just going to pull that thread up, rethread my needle, and try and get a bit more of a straighter horizontal line. That's something you want to look out for when you're going outside the holes of the Aida fabric. So now I'm going to try that again, get it to lay a little bit more straight across horizontally. There we go. And finish those horizontal gray threads. Okay, perfect. And I'll run my needle through the back of the fabric just to secure the tail, and I can clip that off and move to my red floss to go horizontally. So I'm going to take DMC 221, cut a nice, forearm's length or shorter because we're working with short strands. Got to find my end here. There we go. Cut a nice length, about a forearm, just because that's what I'm used to, forearm's length, and I'm going to grab one thread of floss from this color and thread my needle. And I bring my needle up to get going with the red, just double checking my pattern there, holding the tail. And I'm going to just make long, straight stitches across the hat in horizontals. Actually, I'm going to pre-secure my floss because these are really long stitches, and so it doesn't give me the opportunity to have a loop happening or forming on the back side of my fabric as quickly or as conveniently. So I'm just going to pre-secure, start over here, so my floss doesn't go anywhere, and now create those long, straight horizontal strands that alternate between the gray horizontal straight stitches that I've already done. Perfect. Go ahead and finish that one. Want it to lay nice and flat against the gray stitching, and I'll just run my needle across the back side, catching some of the threads and loops there to secure that. And actually, I'm looking at my pattern. I could alternate back to the gray, or I could keep going with red. I'm just going to keep going with the red, even though I've already kind of tied myself off. I'm not going to clip it. I'm just going to keep going because I still have plenty of floss. And I'm going to start doing the vertical strands. Oops, I need to rethread my needle. Sometimes that happens. Pull your floss through. Okay, so I'm going to start doing the vertical portion of the plaid for Sherlock Holmes' hat. And this one, since it's just a really short stitch, I'm not going to worry about weaving it. And you don't have to weave any of these. I'm just going to play with that as an option. So these short ones on the side, I'm just stitching because they're short. It's not going to make much of a difference to weave them or not. But now for the longer ones, I'm going to bring that through and play with weaving it. So if I hold my needle sort of flat-ish against the fabric, I'm not going to pull up the existing stitches very much, and I'm just going to go over, under with my needle, alternating over and under the existing gray and red threads. And you can choose whether you're going over the red and under the gray, or under the red and over the gray, it doesn't really matter because it's just going to contribute to a textured plaid look. So I'm just sort of weaving my needle, trying not to catch the brown cross stitches, but just going through, over and under the gray and red long straight stitches, and then of course pushing my needle all the way through to the back so I can bring it up where the next line in the plaid needs to go. So just sort of slide my needle through. I don't want to loosen the threads of the existing stitches, so I'm just trying to keep the needle fairly parallel to the fabric and the existing stitching. Let the point of the needle do a lot of the work. And push that line through. And then I've just got some short stitches on the side to do. And again, I'm not going to worry about weaving the short ones because it visually isn't going to make too much of a difference. So I'll just weave this one because it's 3, but then the farthest right short stitch I won't weave. Just go ahead and poke that through. Perfect. So we've got all of our vertical red stitches done. And now I've got one thread of DMC 645 threaded into my needle, and I'm going on the vertical gray stitches, and I'm doing a similar thing as I did with the red. On the short vertical stitches on the far right and left, I'm not going to worry about weaving, but on the longer stitches in the middle and getting to the sides of the hat, I am going to weave, and I'm going to do an opposite weave to what I did for the red. So if you're weaving your needle through, which again, you don't have to, it's just a fun way to add texture. If for the red floss, you went over the red and under the gray, then when you use the gray floss, you're going to want to go under the red and over the gray, just to give it sort of that realistic look. So get close, use the point of your needle, do what you got to do to make sure you're not catching the wrong threads, pulling up any fibers. Just take it slow and steady, and you'll see that it creates a really, really fun texture. So as I'm finishing up the vertical gray stitches of this plaid, I just want to remind you that what we're doing here is just simple straight stitches. We just happen to be sort of weaving them in and out of each other. It's a way to get creative and add some detail and interest to your portrait or your cross-stitch projects without too much work, because ultimately at the end of the day, a straight stitch is pretty straightforward. So don't let things intimidate you. Okay, so now we have the hat done. I'm going to go ahead and end my floss, just take it through the back side of the fabric and clip it off. And get that nice and close. Perfect. Okay. Okay, Sherlock Holmes looks really good. I love the way his hat turned out. I really like that. So what I'm going to do next, just for the sake of time and thinking ahead to our 4th and final class and what we can realistically accomplish in an hour while we're doing straight stitches, I'm going to go ahead and take DMC 3782, the light mocha brown, and cut a good length of that, split my 6 strands into 2 groups of 3, and I'm going to do more straight stitches because that's what we're doing. We're in the groove, we're in the zone, we might as well do some more straight stitches on our pattern to save a little time for our final class coming up. So I'm going to go ahead and do these stairs. This is just 3 horizontal stitches in front of the door. So I'm going to pre-secure my floss, just run it through the stitches on the back side of my fabric just to make sure that the floss isn't going anywhere. That way I don't have to worry about holding a tail or catching a tail or anything on these long stitches. Okay, that was easy. Just 3 long horizontal stitches. We did the stairs. It looks great. And now I'm going to go ahead and do the archway, kind of the same thing. I'm going to create the top roundish line first, and then I'll create sort of the sunburst archway using DMC 3782. Okay, so I have 3 strands of DMC 3782 on my needle, and I pre-secured that along the back, and I'm just following the pattern, just counting how many squares up and over I need to put my needle through to follow the pattern and achieve the look of this stone archway around the door. And I finish my floss off on the back and clip it off. And while we're doing straight stitches, I'm going to go ahead and finish the 221B Baker Street and do one of the 2 lamps so that we can focus on the greenery in our next class. So I'm going to go ahead and do the lamp above Sherlock Holmes's head. I'm going to thread my needle with 3 strands of DMC 310, the black floss. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the lamp, which involves a couple of the half or diagonal stitches that we have tackled in the Watson and Holmes pattern in their vests and cravats. But in this case, oops, pull my floss through, try again, keep a tail, hold it with my finger, there we go. So in this case, I'm going to create more of a triangle shape because you can see that the triangle shape is pretty integral to the overall shape of the lantern versus just doing the lone diagonal for the half stitch. I'm going to do the diagonal portion as well as the top horizontal portion of that stitch. So securing my tail, I've done that horizontal portion and now I'm doing the diagonal, and you can see I've got a little triangle there so that when I do the middle stitch of the top of this lantern as a cross stitch, and then I finish the left side with a symmetrical triangle, making the horizontal stitch across the top, and then the diagonal stitch. Now I've started to create the shape that's in the pattern, and just to smooth out the top of the lantern, I'm going to do a horizontal stitch across the top of that middle cross stitch as well, so it lays nice and straight like that. And now I'm going to take my black floss and work my way down the rest of the pattern, just following it precisely, filling out the triangles. When I'm done with the black, I will cut that off on the back, rethread my needle with DMC 645, the dark gray, complete the cross stitches, cut that off, and now I've got my orange floss to do the flame. And I completed the cross stitch of the flame right in the center of the lantern, but on top of that, I'm going to add some straight stitches just to give it a little bit more of a glisteny, realistic look and shape so that it looks like it lays a little more flat, a little more straight in the lantern, just because I can. Because I'd like to show you another example of thinking outside the box, making a pattern your own, thinking about how you can use even simple stitches like straight stitches to liven up your patterns, make things look a little fancier, a little more realistic. I'm going to pull that needle through the backing and clip that off. And now we've got a fun straight stitched or satin stitched, more realistic flame over top our cross stitch flame that we did. And now I'm going to get my DMC 310 again back in my needle. I've got 3 strands of that, and I'm just going to do these vertical straight stitches to finish off the lantern. So because these are straight stitches, a little less secure than cross stitches, I'm just going to pre-secure my floss because I can. It's an option. I've got lots of stitches I can use on the back side to secure that floss. And I'm just going to do straight stitches, vertical, easy peasy. And there's my fingernail trick, just making sure that the straight stitches lay flat against the stitching that's already there and they don't cover anything up too massively, because it'll lay right next to the flame. I don't want it to cover it up too much. Okay, there we go. And looking at this lantern, where the diagonals lay as the lantern hood, if you will, comes out, I can see some of the white fabric sticking through. So I'm just going to do 2 straight stitches, put them exactly where I need them, just to kind of cover up that white space and fill in the look of the hood of the lantern a little bit more. Why? Because I can. Because once I've seen it stitched, I can see that fabric showing through. I don't love it, so I do what I need to do to make it look the way I want. And you can too. Permission granted. So go ahead and clip that off, and we are done with one of the lanterns. And we'll do the other one in class so that we can talk through some of those techniques again as well for review. Last but not least, we're going to add the text for 221B Baker Street. We're going to use 2 strands of the black floss as opposed to 3, and I want to use 2. Now you'll notice it looks light, skinnier than a full cross stitch, but I want to still use 2 threads instead of just 1 because I don't want any of my straight stitches of this text to get lost as it sits between the existing cross stitches of the blue window. you'll notice as you stitch your text in the window, as you pull some of these straight stitches tight, they can sort of get squished or pulled into or just sit in the crevice, I guess, between the existing cross stitches, and you can lose a little bit of the definition or width of your floss. So that's why I wanted to use 2 strands instead of just the one, because 1 strand of floss straight stitched like this on top of existing cross stitches is far more likely to get lost visually than 2 threads. So I've sped up this video slightly just because this takes a minute. The first 2 numbers, the 2 2s of 221B, are pretty easy to follow. They just fall right in the holes of the Aida fabric, just straight stitches. So pretty easy to follow that. You'll see the number 1 that falls between the holes of the Aida fabric. And just like we did for the plaid, just like we've done for some other things, you just poke your needle right where it needs to go for that number 1 there. So you create a little diagonal. It's like a little quarter stitch. Both of the holes of the diagonal of the 1 fall between holes of the Aida fabric. And then you create the vertical part. I'm just going to fluff my number there. Floss gets pulled through a little bit. So you can use the tip of your needle to fluff your floss if you need to. And now I'm going to tackle the letter B, which also has a portion that falls outside the holes or grid of the Aida fabric. Follow the pattern as best you can. Make it work for you, and you'll just get that little text in the window. Again, you want to get as close as you can, but don't be too much of a perfectionist about it, because the whole point is alluding to the fact that this is Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. Your brain will fill in the blanks. So if you see 221B, your brain's going to fill that in the right way. So when you're done with that, go ahead and run your needle against the floss on the back and clip that off. And that is it for this bonus stitch along. We added quite a few details, got a little bit farther, and for our 4th and final class through Michaels.com, we will finish this pattern up.